Meka Whaitiri.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker, tēnā tātou katoa. I'm happy to take a call, Mr Speaker, on Estimates Debate 2015 Primary Industry. Before I do that, Mr Chair, can I please acknowledge the passing of the last 2/8 Māori Battalion veteran from Awatere Valley of Te Wairō. Te hai maurua Ben Hock e te rangatira o te pakunga tuarua haere, haere, haere atu rā. Mr Chair, I come from a long line of freezing workers, and it's this contribute from that perspective I'm going to contribute to this vote that we're discussing today, Mr Speaker. Can I acknowledge Rose White, an auntie of mine who, after 40 years, 328 days, has finally hung up her apron and knives after working for Silverfern Farms in Whakatū. So I want to acknowledge my auntie and wish her all the very best in her retirement. Mr Speaker, as a product of freezing workers, my auntie often told me that freezing workers were the backbone of our economy, and I will work with anybody in this House in a fit-for-purpose primary policies that enable opportunities for all New Zealanders. Mr Speaker, I'm happy to be a member of this very hard-working select committee. And I want to acknowledge both our chair and the minister for coming when we examined his vote, and it was a very big vote that we had to examine. But Mr Speaker, my contribution tonight is going to be on the Primary Growth Partnership, and there's been a lot of speakers speaking about that tonight. Can I, just for the purpose of those that may not be there, just quickly remind us that the Primary Growth Partnership was established in 2009. Its purpose is to increase investment in innovation and achieve economic growth and sustainability for multiple industries in the primary sector, and it's responsibly administered by the Ministry of Primary Industries. The program meets equal exceeds the investment made by the Crown with private investors, and it has an investment advisory panel which assesses all the proposals and business plans before they make a recommendation. In the last Parliament, Mr Chair, the Primary Production Committee requested that the Office of the Attorney General examine the PGP, and the committee was specifically interested in the transparency and management of the program, and hence my reason for making this contribution. On the 30th of November 2014, Mr Chair, the Crown committed $322 million to 18 programs, of which just under $120 million had been spent. The Auditor Office undertook a performance audit of PGP, and it reviewed 6 programs with a combined investment of $491.3 million. So what was the findings of the Office? Basically, the Auditor General said that the PGP was set up too quickly. And encountered some challenges in its early stages. For example, the definition of funding, conditions and criteria in the early funding rounds appeared to be, quote, loose. We expressed concern and concept of additionality, which my colleague Damien O'Connor talked about, to ensure that we weren't just paying, or the Crown wasn't just paying for something that should have been just normal process of some of these larger industries. Mr Chair, they also identified that given that the size of our country of New Zealand is quite small, there were going to be times that you could have conflict in terms of limited pool of expertise in the primary sector. The Officer General noted, however, that the limited scope of the audit didn't determine whether the Advisory Committee or the Programme Steering Committee had potential conflict of interest that should have been declared. So that's not saying conflict of interest wasn't there, Mr Chair, it just wasn't part of the scope of the investigation. So what was the overall finding of the PGP according to the Auditor General? Clearly, Mr Chair, transparency and accountability issues were identified. And so that was something that the Select Committee took on board, and we are undertaking to investigate it again in about 6 months. So I want to just make sure that for my colleagues on that committee that we uphold the findings of the Auditor General, ensuring that all Crown money is going for what it's intended. Mr Speaker, I I know this is rushed because we've only got a few minutes. I want to turn your attention now to the Crown Irrigation Investment Limited. I want to acknowledge the Minister again coming to the Select Committee and his commitment that we will not be invested.
Stephen Browning.
Thank you, Mr Chair.